So Randy, thank you.
Thank you. All right. How are we doing? Making it through day one? All right. I know these afternoon sessions are always pretty tough, and as the conference week goes by, each day they get harder and harder. So I'm glad to be at least doing this presentation on day one. Pretty empty room here, which that's fine. I feel like there are less people that have the opportunity to shoot the messenger on this presentation, because this is one that can be a little difficult to absorb, just because of how things operate in reality in the field. When we run engineering calculations and plan for best case scenario analysis, we often see that what we see in the field is a bit different. So how many in the room here are we regulatory side? Raise your hand if you're on the regulatory side. So everybody's industry or service provider. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Yeah, so what I want to go over is a guidance document that EPA put out through the Clean Air Act, and the reasons behind this guidance document. It was put out in 2009. There's a little bit of background language in here. On my slides, I tend to put a lot of language in there directly from the regulations, so that you'll have it once you get a copy of these presentations. You'll have it right there at your fingertips. You can read all of it. I won't read these slides verbatim. I try not to do that, so that you don't feel bored, number one, and also I don't like people feeling like, man, I paid for this and I could have read it myself. This guy's up here just reading these slides to me. I'd like to go through some of these definitions, and I will read those, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation on this subject, because of the 8 guidance issues that were put together in this document, we're really going to cover stoppages and postponements as that applies to emission testing or stack testing. Disclaimer, legal. Look, I'm presenting information to the best of my knowledge. Consult your own legal department before you apply any of these rules or regulations to your practices. Again, these are my qualifications. We've been over that. So we'll go over a few again definitions. What is stack testing? What are stack tests used for? Why did the Clean Air Act and the EPA provide this guidance document? What were the 8 areas of concern or goals that they intended to accomplish or overcome through this guidance? And then we'll spend a little bit of time with stoppages, postponements, and reschedules. So a stack test, also referred to in the industry or by the EPA as a performance test or source test, is done for a few different reasons. You can measure certain pollutants, certain compounds, whether it's NOx, CO, particulate matter, volatile organics, hazardous air pollutants coming from the exhaust of a source. These tests can help to demonstrate the capture efficiency of capture control technology. They can also help to determine the destruction efficiency of sources, like you will see with burners or thermal oxidizers. Stack testing is a tool that is used by the EPA to ensure that a facility meets its limits per certain regulations. And we'll touch on a few of those regulations here as it applies to the sources. Specifically, my company deals with mainly natural gas-fired sources. We are very heavy into the gas compression industry. We've done turbines, we've done boilers, we've done thermal oxidizers. Again, if it's natural gas fired, we can typically test on those units. So that's going to be the focus and the meat of this. So a little bit of background here. In 2000, an EPA office review by the Inspector General uncovered that the EPA didn't have anything as far as a national guidance document to put out to the state agencies, to put out to industry, to have better uniformity of what we're trying to accomplish for stack test. So the Inspector General concluded that this lack of guidance and oversight had an adverse effect on stack testing as a tool in determining compliance. So there were three issues that they uncovered here and that they were trying to address, which was recommended testing frequencies, discrepancies in test procedures, and inconsistent reporting of test results. In addition to the national guidance, the Inspector General recommended that the EPA enhance its oversight program, which nobody in the industry likes to hear, but again, this was done for the sake of uniformity and clarity, transparency, and just have a better understanding. So the concerns associated with testing frequencies and the reporting of the test results, that was addressed by the Clean Air Act Stationary Source Compliance Monitoring Strategy, which came out in 2001. And then regarding high priority violations, in 1998, the agency provided supplementary guidance specifying how violations identified through stack testing should be addressed. Each of these documents are cited in the presentation here. You can dig into those at a later time. So after this review from the Inspector General in 2000, they put out some guidance in 2005 that superseded some guidance that was put out in 2004, and then put out more guidance in 2009, which supersedes all of this. So the guidance document put out in 2009 is what I am quoting from, what I'm citing, where all this information comes from. Goals of the National Stack Testing Guidance were this. They wanted to expand the compliance monitoring strategy and the high priority violation policy to fully address the concerns raised by the Inspector General on these issues. They wanted to improve uniformity on how stack tests are conducted, specifically related to tests that were subject to NSPS 40 CFR Part 60, NESHAP 40 CFR Part 61, and MACT 40 CFR Part 63. This was also done to improve the coordination between the EPA and state and local agencies. You've got state implementation plans now, and then it also enhanced EPA's oversight of those state and local programs to ensure that the tool of stack testing was being properly utilized. So by definition, stack testing may be conducted for various reasons. You've got relative accuracy test audits that can be done. You can do linearity checks on sources where you might say, oh, we need to do a test at 25% load, 50% load conditions, and 75 up to 90% load conditions. These can be done as routine calibrations of SIMs, continuous emission monitoring units. But for the purposes of this guidance document, they really focused in on Part 60, 61, and 63. And so that's really what we'll talk about. So those parts would cover Quad J testing for compressor engines, Quad I for diesel-fired units, generators, Quad K for turbines, Quad Z, MACT for several of these sources where we're looking at formaldehyde, Quad Y for turbines. That regulation was recently updated. As well, but so that's what we're going to be talking about as far as performance testing. It does not include visual inspections on your units. Again, the 8 areas that the EPA was trying to address with this was establishing a time frame for conducting stack test. So again, if you have a source, if you have a compressor engine, you set it on location, you have up to 180 days to get that unit tested. Typically, you want to days. So they put some language together to define that. They put some language together to define stack test waivers, how to submit and prepare stack test notifications with your test plan, observations from the agencies of your stack test, representative testing conditions. This is where, again, you'll have the certain load conditions, whether you're staggering it at 25, 50%, 75%. Most of this code and applicability here has you testing at 90% load conditions or better, comma, or maximum achievable test conditions or load conditions. And so again, that's all I'm going to do as far as touching on those. Really, I'll spend some time on stoppages, postponements, and test reports. So here's the thing. With large major source facilities, Title V facilities, where you've got a lot of competent people that are well-informed, well-educated on the regulatory compliance issues associated with those facilities, you don't see a lot of these issues with stoppages or postponements. From where we've seen it really become an issue is in the compressor engine space, where you have a large volume of minor source facilities, thousands upon thousands of compressor engines that the agencies just don't have the power, the resources to have applicable or great enough coverage to regulate these sources as appropriate. And so with that, you've seen just a lack of oversight, to be quite frank, and you're seeing operators and testing companies going out there and approaching this in ways that ultimately could get the operator in trouble. And so, again, from the perspective of don't shoot the messenger, this is a hard topic to tackle, and so I just want the people in this room to understand the language that's out there to be able to go back to what the EPA has put out as far as guidance documents. And there's a term buried in here called any credible evidence. Has anyone heard that term before? Any credible evidence and is familiar with it? Okay, good. Then you're going to learn something here, and I hope it doesn't freak you out. So the primary issue with stoppages is whether it's appropriate to stop a stack test being conducted to determine compliance once that stack test has started. There are no regulatory provisions in the NSPS, in NESHAP, or MACT programs that addresses specifically whether a test is allowed to be stopped for various reasons. There are occasions where you would stop the sampling to move your probe, but then you'll continue your test run after that. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about discontinuing a test altogether, not completing it. The uninformed nature of what we see is people will stop doing a test because maybe they're not hitting their permit limits. Maybe the source isn't passing. That's a primary issue. There could be mechanical issues that come up. There could be, change in ambient conditions can really goof up air-fuel ratio controllers' abilities to run the engines the way that they're designed to run. So there are some things that can come up here, but the point is what the EPA is trying to prevent from happening is you've set up a stack test, you've submitted your 30-day pre-test notification or your 60-day advanced test notification. You get there to the source and it's not meeting its limits, and you just say, okay, we'll move on, we'll come back to this, we'll reschedule it. This is now called an engineering study or a spot check. This isn't the actual test that we were going to do. So what the EPA has said is that if you do that, if you are stopping a test because you are not meeting your limits, right here, you did that? Great. Not the first one. I dare say I'll be the last. Any credible evidence may be used to demonstrate non-compliance. So if you're postponing a stack test, so again, for major sources, Title V facilities, large, industrial processes that are coming under stack testing applicability, a lot of those major sources, they will actually have an agency representative on site the day of testing. It's hard to just stop a test or postpone it in those situations. Not to say that it hasn't been done or attempted to be done, but it's difficult. We see in the northern states, like Michigan, they are present on every stack test, even for compressor engines. Arkansas is the same way. But when you get to states like Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, New Mexico, that's primarily where we do our work. They will occasionally come out to review a stack test or witness a stack test, and that's the whole point of submitting your pre-test notifications, to give them the opportunity to be there. But they don't have the bandwidth to be out there for every engine test. Again, we've got thousands and thousands of these out there, and so You don't have that opportunity. Another thing that has been allowed, and this is for good or bad or worse, with engine testing, a lot of times you don't have to identify one specific source and say, we're going to test it on this one specific date. There has been this allowance of saying, hey, we've got 8 engines or 10 engines, whatever the number is, that we're going to be testing over the course of this work week. And that just allows for opportunities for companies to, deal with their problem sources and just rotate them to the back of the week. Well, is that legally correct? And the answer per this guidance would be no, you should not do that. The source should be ready to test. And if you do encounter that, what are you doing? Are you reporting that? Again, at Title V facilities, you must report deviations in your annual or semi-annual compliance reports. And so those operators that we've worked with that have those types of facilities, they are actually reporting deviations from their permit conditions. But again, when you start going out to a lot of these minor source facilities where there's just no one to witness or see it, it is okay. We'll get that source straightened out. Come back at the end of the week and we'll test it, and we'll call it a spot check or an engineering check. And so from the standpoint of a service provider or vendor that's doing this, that burden of compliance has been flipped over to us, and it never should have been. And so there's a power balance issue here that will be identified, I think, with more data analysis. We know that data is driving everything right now. So, for example, when you've got states that do go out on every stack test for compressor engines or for natural gas fired generators or for natural gas fired turbines, you see a larger rate of failing units, where in states where there's not a great chance of a state representative being out there to witness the test, no, everything looks good. Everything looks good. And so we know that based on the sheer volume of sources, specifically think about the state of Texas and how many compressor engines are out there. And when you see a very small rate of failure or non-compliance, it does become sort of a glaring statistic when you do see it compared to other states where they are witnessing every test. And so again, this is a hey, let's just get the language out there to make sure that owners and operators of these sources really understand what they're doing or not doing when they're trying to postpone or stop these tests or move on and really shuffle the deck in their scheduling. Force majeure is a different animal, right? If you have a force majeure event, the facilities, you can provide written notification to the administrator in accordance with the applicable regulations, but you still have the requirement to perform the emission test, the stack test, after the event in a timely manner, and you'll have to work with your administrator of that testing program to make sure that everyone's on the same page there to get that done. But force majeure does allow for stoppages. We were on a test in Oklahoma years back, and we literally had to stop because of a tornado. I mean, it happens. That was a legit stoppage. You can, so most of these compliance tests, you're required to do 3 one-hour test runs. If you lose data on a test run, or if something happens during one of those test runs, an unforeseen event at the facility shut down, the facility may not come back online for multiple days. You can submit 2 test runs of data, and upon the approval of the administrator, they can accept that as a full and complete test. Postponements, again, really similar to stoppages. The primary issue is whether it's appropriate to postpone a stack test to determine and demonstrate compliance once it has been scheduled, and if so, under what circumstances. So there's a section, again, you'll have the ability to go and pull this document once you get the slides. The discussion of delays in conducting performance tests in Section 4 stack test notifications. Postponements are treated very similar as stoppages. If a postponement results in this facility failing to complete the test within the required time frame, the facility would be in violation of the requirement to test again within that 60 days of startup or 180 days of startup. Regardless of whether the postponement affects the facility's ability to test, the agency should carefully scrutinize the surrounding circumstances. Again, coming back to that any credible evidence. Why was this test postponed? Okay, mechanical issues. What type of mechanical issues? Okay, we need to see your maintenance records. Let's go back to your last periodic test, your quarterly test. What was the engine doing at that time? Did you have degradation of the catalyst's ability to reduce your emissions coming out of the exhaust? When was the last time that catalyst was clean? When was the last time those catalysts were replaced? Were you running that engine without catalyst? What are the circumstances there that caused this issue to come up or to have that test postponed? And sorry, I really can't believe I put this graphic in there because it's so cheesy and so overused. The old Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, I'll be back, but reschedules it. For some reason, a stack test must be delayed. You have to provide a 7-day notification to the agency of when you intend to retest that source.